Hey guys, Chef Scott here for Devil's Food Kitchen. Welcome to the channel. If you've followed my channel for any amount of time, especially if you've followed my blog, you know that I am an absolute breakfast fiend. I love breakfast. I could have it 3 times a day. It's my favorite meal by far. So today's recipe is really exciting because we're making cinnamon rolls, which in my mind is in like the top 5 of all breakfast pastries. You might be surprised to know that the recipe is actually really simple and relatively quick. It doesn't take a lot of active time to make, and you get a really great result, something that seems like it took a long time. So I think this is the perfect kind of recipe for a breakfast or brunch party or potluck, something where you need to contribute a dish. You kind of want to show out, but you don't have the time or energy to do something super elaborate. This is the one for you. As always, a link to a printable recipe as well as links to all the equipment I'm using is in the description below. If you want to jump ahead to the method, you can do that now. I have a few recipe notes, mostly about proofing dough, which is something we haven't talked about on the channel yet and is a really important topic. And last but not least, I want to give a quick shout out to Bicycle Coffee for this badass t-shirt. Bicycle Coffee is out of Oakland, California in Jack London Square. They do all of their own coffee roasting in-house. They make all of their own t-shirts and swag. I've been there many, many times and they're pretty dope. So if you are in the area, I highly suggest checking them out. Bicycle Coffee, thanks for the shirt. All right, with that out of the way, let's get into the science behind cinnamon rolls. My only real notes this week have to do with proofing your dough. Now, proofing is a topic that is much bigger than the scope of just this recipe and something we're going to get into in more depth when we do a bread recipe, which we will do soon. But for now, it's important to still understand what proofing is and how to do it, especially if you're at home where it can be a little tricky. To understand proofing, we need to take one step back and talk about yeast. So yeast in a recipe is almost always going to demand proofing in the method. Yeast is a living organism. It eats sugar and it expels gas in the form of CO2. That gas is what gives bread the rise during a proof and contributes to flavor and texture and the overall bake of a product. So making sure that you proof properly is really important because you're giving yeast the time to do what it needs to do. And that's all proofing is. It's creating a warm, humid environment, which is the ideal condition for yeast activity over a specific period of time to let yeast eat sugar and expel gas to increase the volume of your product. The right conditions will depend from one recipe to the other, but generally will be no higher than 80 degrees Fahrenheit and about 70 to 80% humidity. Proofing in a commercial kitchen is often pretty simple because you have a proofer, which is a machine designed to create very specific temperature and humidity control so that you can proof your dough. At home, we don't have that option. They do offer a home version of proof boxes. You can find lots of different varieties of them, but I don't recommend them. I don't think they do a fantastic job for what you end up paying for them. They're bulky and cumbersome and really can only perform one task, which is proofing, and I never love that in a home kitchen. Instead, I simply use my oven. It generates heat, it's well insulated, and you can add humidity just like you would in a commercial proofer. Now, the technique that I'm going to talk about is going to really vary depending on your oven at home, how strong it is, what the heat source might be, how well insulated your oven is, but you'll be able to experiment and tweak this method to your own purposes. First and foremost, I'd highly recommend getting a digital thermometer, which is going to allow you to monitor the temperature inside the oven without opening and closing the door, which is of course going to let lots of heat out and create an unstable environment. If you're serious about your proofing, I'd also recommend getting a hygrometer, which measures the relative humidity in an environment. The good news is these are super cheap and easy to get, and yes, I've got a link to one in the description below. There's really 2 steps that are interchangeable into turning your oven into a proofer. For some ovens, smaller in size and especially well insulated, you can simply take a pan of steaming hot water and put it in the bottom rack of the oven. The steam is naturally going to create humidity, but also create heat, and that may be enough for your purposes to hit that 80 degrees Fahrenheit mark. If for whatever reason that pan of water isn't enough to create the heat as well as the humidity, then you can very briefly turn your oven on to get the heat source working and then turn it off again. Again, monitor that temperature with your digital thermometer. If it gets a little too high, you can wait for the oven to cool below 80 Fahrenheit before adding your pan and then your product to proof. I've used this method in my own home to make everything from croissants to bread to the cinnamon rolls we're doing today. With a little bit of experimenting, you will have your very own proofer anytime you need it. The proofing setup I like to use at home in my own oven is to place my dough on the top rack of the oven and then the steaming water in a pan on the bottom rack, preferably off to the side of the dough so that you don't have steam coming directly up into the bowl and overheating it. If it's not possible to have your steam element to the side of your product in an oven, then place a sheet pan in the middle rack to prevent some of that excess heat from reaching the bowl. Personally, I love to use these professional pans as the water holding element for my oven proofer. These are known as third pans and you can find them inexpensively online. I use a tea kettle to heat my water quickly and pour about 1/2 inch of steaming water into the pan. That'll be plenty of steam and heat for a regular sized oven. Then place the pan directly in the oven with your proofing product and close the door. You don't want to open and close the door a lot during this process because you're going to let heat and humidity out and that's going to affect your results. And this is why it's really great to have a digital probe thermometer and a hygrometer inside the oven so that you can monitor temp and humidity. Now that we know what proofing is, why we need to do it, and how to do it at home, the last thing I want to mention is that a recipe is only a guide. I'll call for proofing for an hour or 2 hours, but the important key is that you proof until something doubles in volume. That may take more than an hour, it may take less than an hour, but make sure that you master your own recipe and don't become a slave to temperatures and times that might not work in your kitchen. Those are all the notes I have for this week, and I think we are ready to make some cinnamon rolls. Heat the milk to 110 Fahrenheit, 43 Celsius. Combine the milk, the first scaling of sugar, and yeast and whisk until the sugar and yeast are well dissolved. Sprinkle the first scaling of bread flour over the milk in a light, even coat. Let the mixture sit undisturbed for 10 to 15 minutes until cracks form on the surface, which is a sign the yeast is activated. Add the butter, the second scaling of flour, second scaling of sugar, the whole eggs, the salt, and the cinnamon. Basically everything else. Mix on medium-low speed using a dough hook for 6 to 8 minutes. The finished dough should be smooth and show signs of gluten development, holding together when gently stretched. Place the dough in a bowl and cover lightly with plastic wrap, then proof for 1 hour until it has doubled in volume. Knock down the dough to expel excess gas. Lay the dough out on a non-stick baking mat, shaping it to about 12 by 15 inches, which are the dimensions inside the border of a silpat. Transfer to a sheet pan and cover with plastic wrap, then freeze for 1 hour, followed by half an hour in the refrigerator. To make the filling, simply combine all of the ingredients and mix well. Keep the mixture covered until ready to use so the brown sugar doesn't dry out. Give the chilled dough a light coating of flour and roll it out down its length to 1/4 inch thick. Cover the dough in an even coat of filling, leaving about 1 inch of space at the top edge. Press the filling down either with your hands or a spatula. Roll the dough beginning at the bottom edge. Maintain a tight roll throughout the process. With the roll sitting on its seam, lightly mark 2-inch sections with your knife. Be careful not to cut into the dough. Using one of the marks in the center, cut the roll into 2 pieces just so it fits better on the sheet pan. Place the roll seam down on the pan and lightly cover with plastic wrap, then let the dough rest in the fridge for 30 minutes. Prepare your baking pan with a light coat of pan spray and a piece of parchment paper to line the bottom of the pan. Cut the chilled cinnamon roll into the 2-inch sections marked. I cut 5 rolls for an 8-inch square pan. Place the rolls in the pan with the filling face up. Proof for 1 to 2 hours until the rolls double in size. While the rolls are proofing, make your icing. Combine the sugar, butter, and cream cheese and mix on low speed. Add the salt, vanilla, and milk while mixing, then increase the speed to medium and mix until well combined. After removing them from the oven, place a dollop of icing on each roll, then lightly spread the icing to coat. Doing this while the rolls are hot is going to give you a nice glaze effect with the icing. Now it's time to plate them, serve them, and the best part, eat them.